So these are common, I guess, things that we hear when we talk to customers. So in terms of cloud isn't secure, since cloud computing and technology has been invented, the number one reason people are slow to migrate over is due to security concerns. And that was what happened in our survey as well, just at the start of the session. So similar to the security concerns you have with on-premise data storage, you either can do it well or you can do it poorly. If you speak to any industry-leading CIO, you'll find him or her saying that the cloud is inherently more or less secure. Now, really, the way that I talk about this to different customers is basically this. I don't think there's probably a more secure system on the planet than Office 365. And you have to think about it this way. You might have an organization, you might set everything up to best practices, but you typically only have one or two security experts within your organization. Microsoft apparently has close to 15,000 people working on the security of all of their technology. So when you think about it from that way, it's going to be very, very rare that Microsoft, with all of its experts, with all of its testing, with all of its data telemetry, is going to be any less secure than your on-premise SharePoint environment. In addition to that, the Office 365 suite has a number of capabilities to help with security also. So whether it's something like data loss prevention, whether it's something like information rights management or Azure rights management, there's a whole range of other capabilities which I think inherently make the cloud much more secure than an on-premise environment. The second is around losing control. So people are always scared that they're going to lose control, whether either they're going to lose control of where their data is, or alternatively they're going to lose control to, for instance, the updates that they can make to their environment, whether that's SharePoint or something else. So this is another myth that we often hear. So by migrating to the cloud, you're in essence moving data from your own infrastructure in-house, and you're moving it to a data center that's stored and hosted by Microsoft. Once again, it really is a matter of how talented your team is and how knowledgeable they are about cloud infrastructure. What I can tell you about this, though, is that most IT teams that we work with, they find themselves loving the cloud because there are much more advanced tools to control the security and monitoring of your environment. So in terms of losing control, I think there's actually a lot more control in the cloud. There's a lot more capabilities to control things. And whether that's using some of the administration in Office 365, or alternatively maybe moving some of these workloads to Azure, there's definitely a lot of capabilities there that you can leverage. Now, in terms of SharePoint Online, one of the things you will lose is that ability to completely control your entire SharePoint environment. So because SharePoint Online is created as a service, as Microsoft releases updates, you will also get those updates within your SharePoint environment. What's interesting though is that Microsoft can push out updates really whenever it wants. Now, for some people that's really good because you always want to be on the bleeding edge of technology. For others, it might not be as good. We've found for a lot of our clients that the disruptive changes that Microsoft makes in Office 365 has been relatively well handled. But once again, you have to understand that if you're moving to that Office 365 environment for SharePoint Online or some of these other tools, you have much more limited control in terms of when you want to update. Now, Microsoft is making it a little bit easier in terms of being able to control how often updates are and using things like first release. So you can put some of your users in your tenant to first release. But once again, you've got a little bit less control in terms of how you're going to update that. And the last one is around business justification. There's a whole bunch of data there that says that moving to the cloud is actually costs around 30% less. And what's really interesting is when you look at this just from, let's say, a subscription cost basis, a lot of people look at those numbers and think they're incredibly high, but those numbers don't take into account things like growth, data costs, and other soft costs associated with having on-premise data. So it's not just how much SharePoint costs or how much the service costs, but it's everything else around that, from the switches that you're paying for, to the racks, to the rooms that all that stuff is stored in, to having a UPS system in terms of a fire. All of this sort of stuff really adds up to the cost. And there's a lot of data which we'll send over in terms of that kind of business justification. But really what we've found and what the data shows is overall, cloud environments are going to be 30% less costly than doing anything on-prem. So just to carry on with one more business justification kind of myth, let's take a look at how IT budgets were being allocated. So what you see here is the organizations are investing more in hybrid and public cloud services because they recognize that they will decrease your costs in the long run. In fact, hybrid scenarios are trending upwards, where 50% of large organizations will have hybrid and cloud deployments by the end of this year. The majority of cost savings come from the removal of physical infrastructure elements like server, hardware, power consumption, and physical space. Now, what I really like about the cloud is that it allows you to scale up and scale down extremely easily. So let's say that your organization grows at a rapid rate over a couple of years, and you buy a whole bunch of hardware, you buy a whole bunch of computers to kind of accommodate that growth. But if you then have layoffs, for instance, there's no way that you've invested all of that money into that hardware, so it's very difficult to get that money back. In a cloud solution or in a cloud environment where you're buying a monthly subscription, it's very easy to scale up and it's very, very easy to scale down. So with organizations and experiencing a lot of change within the last few years, this is something that we've found is very, very compelling. Instead of having these huge upfront costs, if an organization grows, they just buy more licenses. If an organization shrinks, they can just shed those licenses really, really easily. So Greg Deckler, SharePoint MVP and a Director of Cloud Services, wrote a really good article that kind of broke down an apples and apples price cost and comparison of on-prem versus cloud environments, which we'll send over also. But you really have to do an apples to apples comparison. It's not just the hardware, it's not just SharePoint. It's once again power consumption, physical space, all of that other stuff. Having people doing upgrades is a huge thing. Once again, having Microsoft manage those upgrades for you is an incredible amount of time savings. It's an incredible amount of savings in terms of processes also. So now that we've talked a little bit about the cost savings and we've talked a little bit about other various pieces, let's talk about some hybrid scenarios. So there's lots of different hybrid scenarios that you can basically have within Office 365 and within SharePoint. So let's talk about a couple. Now there's three kind of main hybrid scenarios that you have. So there's three common ways you can have SharePoint deployed, and Microsoft still realizes that you may need these scenarios for a number of reasons. Once again, it was funny a few years ago. A lot of people thought that SharePoint on-premise is not going to happen. That SharePoint 2013 was the last version. That's definitely not the case. We've got SharePoint 2016. More than likely, there's going to be future versions of SharePoint there also. So if you're using a traditional or an on-premises scenario, this is likely for corporate or compliance regulations. You also might have a super large SharePoint environment. It just makes the most sense for you to run in your own data warehouse. If you're on a private cloud, the same thing goes. So you probably have compliance to follow or corporate regulations that demand that your cloud be essentially as an internal virtualized environment. So you might be using VMware, but all of that data is still stored essentially on-premise. So it's somewhere where you can go and point to your data, basically. Now the nice thing is because it's virtualized, you can scale or contract on demand. Now when you're in a public cloud though, you can take an idea and move it to an application really, really quickly. So the idea with this is you might have a traditional non-virtualized environment. The next step is really a private cloud environment. And the last one is this hybrid cloud. And this hybrid cloud is really the combination of, let's say, on-premise data and then using some of those workloads within Office 365. So when we talk about traditional, private, and public cloud, think about it in terms of traditional hardware that's on-premise. Private cloud is virtualized hardware that's on-premise. And public cloud is essentially you using Office 365. So the first hybrid scenario that I want to talk about, and this is probably the most common one that we see, is around SharePoint sites and groups. Now in this hybrid scenario, what this allows you to do is to have some of your SharePoint sites on-premise and some of your SharePoint sites in Office 365. And what the hybrid infrastructure allows you to do is allows you to connect to those in such a way where users are very, very unlikely to know that they're either in your on-premise SharePoint environment or they're on Office 365. Now, what's nice around this is you have the ability to control where your data is. So maybe you have your intranet and some important sites which contain valuable information like a board site, for instance, or a compliance-based site on-prem. But then you have other things like team sites and maybe collaboration sites in Office 365. Now, this is probably the most common scenario that we are seeing. And this is especially from a collaboration perspective. Because once again, if you have a whole range of collaboration sites and you don't want to spin up the hardware and have everything to run that, you can have, like I said, you can give that to your users where they can create a site, and then you can decide whether that site's going to be provisioned to Office 365 or it's going to be provisioned to your on-prem environment. Now, in terms of those hybrid scenarios, we won't get into them too technically, but there's a range of user experience things that Microsoft does now with SharePoint 2016 and Office 365, which makes that experience very, very easy for many users. So they wouldn't have to authenticate in again, for instance, if you have that set up. The app launcher, which is just down the bottom here, you can actually use to pin apps like the video portal. So you can pin that, so regardless of whether it's someone on their on-prem environment, they can also access that video portal in Office 365. The other main hybrid scenario is around search. So a lot of organizations, if you've got, let's say, data residing both in Office 365 and in your on-premise environment, one of the big ways to kind of collate that data together and give your users access to that data is around search. Now, there's a few ways that SharePoint hybrid search works. It gets into some super kind of techie details, which we're not going to talk about. But the way that you can set it up now is from a single search box, your organization and anyone within your organization can do a search, and they can see both content from SharePoint Online as well as SharePoint on-premise in one unified search index. And that opens up a whole range of scenarios. For instance, in SharePoint on-prem, not only can you search things like your file shares and obviously your SharePoint sites, but you may also be indexing external data coming outside of SharePoint. So let's say you've got an on-prem environment and you're indexing maybe something like Workday or an SAP system or some file shares, essentially things that sit outside of SharePoint. And then you've got also SharePoint Online. So you might have team sites or OneDrive or some sort of content that sits in SharePoint Online. What this hybrid search scenario allows you to do is to view search results from both indexes in a single search query, which makes it extremely powerful, but also very, very useful and simple from an end user perspective. So this is essentially what hybrid search does. So you can see here on the left-hand side, I have a search box, and when I do a search, at the moment it's orange. If I do a search, you can see that I've got on-premise results, and I've also got online results directly within that same search index. So once again, you might have masses and masses of data across both SharePoint environments, but that single search box is going to show content. Now, once again, if it's set up correctly, everything like permissions and everything else is also going to be in line with that search. So just because it's in hybrid search mode doesn't mean that any of the great stuff that SharePoint Search does in terms of permission trimming or security doesn't happen. The other thing that we're seeing from a lot of customers as well is the ability to have an on-prem SharePoint environment, search some content, push that content up into the SharePoint Search appliance into Office 365, and then allow Delve to run on that content. Now, if you don't know what Delve is a way to be able to surface content very, very easily, and Delve also applies a whole range of AI and machine learning to your search content that you have in order to present a better set of personalized results for you. Now, Delve works out of the box with content with SharePoint Online, but you can also use that with SharePoint on-prem content. So we have one client that essentially loves Delve. Right? It really works well for them in terms of information discoverability. So what they're doing is they're crawling all of their SharePoint on-premise file shares, pushing that stuff up to Office 365, and then using Delve to be able to kind of show and expose that data much, much easier. So that's again one of the scenarios in terms of hybrid search. Now, a few years ago, the hybrid search story wasn't particularly great. You would have to have essentially, if you type in a search term, you'd have like two sets of results, one set from on-prem and one set from online. But now with this new kind of hybrid search in SharePoint 2016, and another feature called the Search Service Appliance, or the Cloud Search Service Appliance, you've got this really great ability that, once again, you can have content in Office 365, you can have content in SharePoint, you can have content outside of SharePoint on different systems. As long as that content is all crawled together and available within that search index, your users are going to be able to search for that content regardless of where they are in your SharePoint hybrid environment. But what's also more interesting, I find, and what I really like, is that ability to then take those search results and put them into machine learning mechanism, for instance, like Delve, and then use those to kind of give a much better and a much richer search experience for users. The next type of hybrid scenario is around taxonomy. Now, this is one of the things where you're either going to be really excited or you're not going to care. But for me, this is super, super exciting. Now, what hybrid taxonomy allows you to do is allow you to bring your taxonomy store to Office 365. So basically, what you can have is you can define a set of terms in your on-premise SharePoint environment. Now, sets of terms are used for a number of different things. Most commonly, they're used for things like metadata, which we use across documents and forms and policies and procedures, for example. And in previous versions of SharePoint, it's very new. This hybrid taxonomy, I think, became general availability just in the last couple of weeks. But in previous versions of SharePoint, you would have a different taxonomy or different values between your online and your on-premise environment. So it made it a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky to have like a consistent set of, let's say, metadata that you're applying to content regardless of where you are. This new hybrid taxonomy allows you to do that. So you can take existing terms and term sets that you've created in SharePoint on-prem. You can promote them or push them through the hybrid taxonomy service to Office 365. And then once again, regardless of if the user creates a form in a team site that's in Office 365 or a form that's in a team site that's an on-prem SharePoint, you can apply a consistent set of taxonomy, a consistent set of metadata, and a consistent set of tags all the way through that content. So from an information architecture perspective, from a compliance perspective, even from a records management perspective, all of this is incredibly useful. Now, once again, this has only come out in the last couple of weeks. We've played around this here. It actually works really, really well. And once again, I know for a lot of clients, this was a pretty big deal, a pretty big issue when moving to a hybrid-based scenario, because you might have had a huge investment in, let's say, terms and taxonomy within your on-prem environment, and really you couldn't do that within Office 365 through a hybrid solution. Now that this is ready to go, once again, you can use terms across both Office 365 and on-prem, making it very, very easy to keep consistency. We'll send out a couple of links, but this literally came out probably about 2 weeks ago now as well. So it's very, very new, but there's some instructions around how to configure that hybrid taxonomy also. So once again, you're either going to really love this or you're not going to care. I really like this because once again, it just helps you if you've made an investment in on-prem. Once again, it helps you move to the cloud or to a hybrid scenario much, much easier. Now, probably the biggest and the best scenario in my mind is basically this. Let's say that you've got an on-prem SharePoint environment and you know about Office 365, but you don't want to make the full move to Office 365 yet, but you're interested in using one of the workloads or one of the capabilities that Office 365 has. Maybe you want to use the video portal, maybe you want to use something like Power BI, maybe you want to use something like Planner or Delve or OneDrive, or any one of these particular tools. Now, you have that option now with the hybrid scenario. So what you would do, you would have your on-prem SharePoint environment. We would set this up in a hybrid-based scenario with Office 365. And then what you can do in Office 365, you don't have to make all of these services available to everyone at one time. You can just pick and choose services that you want. So a really good example that we're seeing with customers is around video. Now, video in SharePoint 2016 and SharePoint 2013 doesn't get handled very well. It never has. I don't think it will now either. but it doesn't do the common things that people expect from, you know, a video solution to do. So things like thumbnailing isn't particularly great, and coding isn't particularly great. But there's a tool in Office 365 which is called the Video Portal, which is probably going to be renamed Stream pretty soon, which has a very powerful full-fledged video capability. So think of the Video Portal as an internal YouTube for your organization. And what I like about the Video Portal is that it does all of those subtle things that you want video storage to do without you having to think about them. So you can upload a file, it'll encode them automatically for you, it'll make sure that depending on your connection and the type of device that you're playing, it's going to do things like buffering and streaming and give you a different resolution also. It has a number of really great statistics as well, so stats in terms of how many people viewed your video. So it's a really great tool, because what we're seeing, particularly in the intranet space, is organizations want to use video a lot more. And using it on SharePoint doesn't work necessarily well. But if you have a hybrid scenario, what you can do is you can say, I've got all of this on-prem data. Let's say I've got an on-premise in Intranet. And what we're going to do, we're going to put all of these videos up in Office 365 Video to make use of all of the capabilities there. And then what we can do, we can embed that video as a simple link or a simple embed from my Video Portal, which sits in Office 365, into my on-prem SharePoint environment. And for a lot of clients that we're working with, this is one of the kind of best solutions, and it's kind of the starting point. Even for organizations that are very kind of anti-cloud, just having your videos up there is the only workload that you've enabled, and enabling that capability is extremely powerful. Now, there's other types of scenarios there also. The other one that we're seeing a lot is around planner or groups. So once again, planner is almost like a Kanban board. It allows you to assign tasks very quickly and very easily. But once again, it's a capability that's not available in SharePoint on-prem. It might never be available in SharePoint on-premise. But once again, with a hybrid scenario, think about those options. Maybe the only thing you enable is planner. So users, once again, can be working on your SharePoint on-premise environment, but if they want to use planner, they're using and storing that data within the cloud. So think of a hybrid environment as giving you the ultimate set of options. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can get very fine-grained in terms of the themes that you want to enable. So whether it's Delve, whether it's Planner, Power BI, Flow, Sway, Teams, all the stuff that Microsoft has as part of that Office 365 suite, with that hybrid scenario, not only can you keep your data on-prem, but you can also choose exactly which one of these capabilities you want to enable. And one of the other ones as well we see is around OneDrive for Business. Now, this is another really common use case that we see for organizations when we're talking about hybrid SharePoint environments. OneDrive is a great tool for personal file storage. It's much better than it used to be. The sync engine actually syncs, so that's very handy. Because for a couple of years there, it didn't sync, which is problematic if you want to use this type of tool. But once again, in your on-prem SharePoint environment, you have that option of creating like a OneDrive for Business internally. But then if you've got that in your on-prem environment, you have to store all of that data and keep all of that up to date for your users. With a hybrid scenario, you've got the ability to do something called OneDrive for Business redirection. So essentially, the way that would work is a user, when they would go to access their OneDrive, instead of that content being stored up in your on-prem SharePoint environment, you can move that content into your Office 365 environment. Now, there's numbers of different advantages around this approach, but the biggest one is in SharePoint Online, each one of your users is going to get 1 terabyte of storage. Now, I can tell you that for most organizations, there's no way you're going to want to provision or have 1 terabyte of storage per user. You don't have to. Let Microsoft deal with that. Right? That's Microsoft's problem. So if you've got an on-prem environment, you can use OneDrive redirection. Once again, each one of your users gets 1 terabyte of storage. That's part of the Office 365 kind of tool set. You don't need to pay anything extra for that. And what we're finding with a lot of organizations, they're starting to kind of get rid of network drives and local storage particularly. So the idea of people still saving stuff to their desktop, is starting to move away. It drives me crazy because, of course, people save stuff to their desktop and the computer explodes or they forget something. By just saving that to OneDrive for Business, for example, they always have that information backed up. You can share that content really easily. But the nice thing as well is, let's say that you start using this OneDrive for Business in a hybrid scenario, a lot of the policies, a lot of the data loss protection things which are part of Office 365, you can also apply to that content also. So in my mind, this is once again a really, really interesting scenario, because we know that users want to have the ability to access their files from anywhere. We know that organizations want to stop having people save stuff to their desktop, and we also know that that no organization wants to provision a huge amount of data for personal storage. So this is a great, great scenario. Essentially, your on-prem SharePoint environment exists. You have a hybrid scenario with Office 365. You enable this thing called OneDrive redirection, which is very, very easy to enable. And then you give your users that ability to store the content that they want within OneDrive for Business. And Microsoft is going to manage all of that storage for you, as well as security and everything else. And the OneDrive for Business client now and the web experience is excellent. It is much, much better than it's ever been. And it's a really quick win, because once again, people losing documents and saving it to their desktop and all of that sort of stuff drives me crazy even here. So it's a really, really quick and easy way to be able to solve that scenario. Now the last one that we'll talk about is really around kind of all Office 365 apps. And you're probably wondering, how does this thing fit together? So the way that this works essentially is SharePoint 2016 across the top has something called the ribbon and something called the waffle, which sits on the top left-hand side there. And what you can do now is you can pin applications where, regardless of where users move across, they're going to be able to basically see those applications and see the same content. So that can be OneDrive for Business. So once again, that little app launcher, OneDrive for Business, regardless of if they're on-prem or online, they click that and they can be redirected to the online piece. That can be Yammer. That could be SharePoint Sites as well. So there's a number of different capabilities, but you do have the ability with the SharePoint Sites tab to see an aggregate view of site membership and recommendations across the cloud. That could be video, which we talked about. That could be Delve, and there's a whole bunch of other features there also. So really, like I said, in my mind, if you're not ready to move to the cloud yet, and a lot of organizations aren't, that ability to be able to maybe just implement a couple of these hybrid workloads very, very simply and very, very easily really makes a lot of sense. So we're almost out of time here. We've only got a few more minutes left, but really from a hybrid scenario, think about it this way. You have the options now of being able to really pick and choose not only all of SharePoint, but some pieces of SharePoint also being able to be used. You've also got the ability now to take individual workloads from Office 365 and just enable them in your on-prem environment. So we know, and trust me, we're very, very pragmatic when we work with customers. Although we would like people to go to Office 365, we know that's not going to be possible. But think about it in a broader context. Maybe it's just some data that you want to move over to Office 365. Maybe it's just some capabilities that you also want to move over. But you have all of these experiences now available to you using hybrid. And in our mind, that makes a great business case. Because I can tell you now, if you've got an Office 365 license already, if you've got SharePoint on-prem already, some of these capabilities like OneDrive, like Delve, like the video portal, really make business sense and provide an incredible amount of business value. So that's all for today's meetings. Okay, so we've got a few questions. Well, actually, we've got a lot of questions that we have. So let's kind of go through some of these. So the question, thank you, Sean. Question is, we don't want to redo all the custom work we've done on our on-prem farm. How would a pre-built SharePoint Intranet be configured in a hybrid environment? Sean, did you write this question, or no, it's actually from someone. Okay, so the way that we do it, basically, the way that we've developed OneDrive is we have the same code base that we use across on-prem and online. So that's the way that we've developed. So it's going to be the exact same thing. Now that's quite different than a lot of custom applications that people build, but that's the way we've kind of chosen to do that. We've got another question as well around hybrid taxonomy. Will the terms with custom properties be exported with hybrid taxonomy? So hybrid terms, yes, they will be. So if you've got a term set and you've got custom properties as part of that term set from our testing, yes, you can actually see that those are actually going to be exported also. So a couple more questions here. What do you think the future is of hybrid in future versions of SharePoint? So that's a really great question. I think personally that Microsoft is still going to provide options for customers that want to make the best use of both on-prem and online data. So in my mind, SharePoint on-premise is still going to exist for many years to come. But I think really the emphasis is going to be providing customers with flexibility in terms of where their data is stored and how their data is going to be available. So that's all what we have time for today. As Sean said, we will send out some slides to you, as well as the recording for the webinar, as well as all the links to all of the things that we've actually chosen. If you are interested in having a discussion around hybrid scenarios, just let us know. But really, the power is in your hands as an organization. You have a lot of capabilities there. From a technical perspective, SharePoint Hybrid is actually very easy to set up these days. It's much easier than it used to be before. So yeah, we really encourage you to look at that broader set of capabilities that SharePoint Hybrid can offer. So we want to thank you once again for your time today. We know that everyone's time is precious, and I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, and we hope to see you soon on more Bonsai Intranet webinars. Thank you so much, everyone.